Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah, a couple of introductions, I guess, before we get going. So I'm Brian. I'm from Microsoft, part of the UK higher education team. So my role is research technology strategist, where I work with all of our UK university customers on anything related to research. That could be trusted research environments, using environments that we just heard about, from the Turing through to anything else in the Microsoft stack, all related to research. And we're here with one of our partners, Methods. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Nicola Mancell. I work with Methods and I'm an impact specialist. And what that means is that I look at those kind of longer term ripples of what we do and what we invest in all sorts of different contexts. I used to be an academic, so I'm really excited to be back in this environment where we're looking at how technology can have an impact on research and not just using it for those that already know how to code and how to access these sort of technologies and services, but for those researchers like me who were a little bit scared of it, didn't really know anything about it, so assumed it wasn't for me. It's like, what could we do if we opened that up? So that's why I'm here today, and that's I'm really excited to talk to you all about the Loome platform.
Brilliant. This is the sort of agenda that we're going to run through today. So we're going to acknowledge some of the challenges for researchers as well as central IT teams looking at access to cloud. And we're not here to tell you that cloud is the solution to everything today. It certainly has its place, but as do other solutions too. But we're going to talk through what Loome is, and you're more than welcome to come stop by our stand if you want a bit more of an interactive sort of demo later on. But we're going to walk through some of the key functionality to show you some of the key challenges that Loome helps overcome when you're looking at using Azure as a research tool. And we'll then finally kind of show you how that slots into a full sort of operating model across a university, which we've started to build out with a few institutions that have certainly represented the conference this week, to see how this can be built into the service offering of a university. So we've got a few challenges we're perfectly well aware of when it comes to uptake of cloud services within an academic environment. So security requirements, we just heard about trusted research environments, ensuring that things are compliant with institutional regulatory requirements, so things like ISO 27001, GDPR, HIPAA compliance, all of these sorts of things as well. And people often aren't exactly sure what that means in the cloud, and if those things are possible. Also, there's then sort of management load on IT. So it can be, we're familiar and comfortable with the fact that IT services within institutions can provide workstations, computer lab resources for people to go and use, HPC facilities, that sort of thing. What does that mean when we then throw cloud into the mix as well? Who manages that? And is that something which people have the capacity to do? Cost and budgeting, we heard about that earlier on as well. How do we ensure that actually people aren't spending more than you intend to spend? How do you understand what you're expecting to spend upfront as well? Cloud can be a great tool to be able to use something for a short period of time or a prolonged period of time, depending on what your requirements are. Flexibility is there, but how do we give you the right guardrails to understand what's appropriate? And the final point there as well is then around too many options. So we mentioned sort of virtual machines earlier on, something crazy like 800 different virtual machine options available in Azure and UK South. That's probably too many options for most people. How do we narrow that down and ensure that people who maybe don't need to look into the nitty-gritty of every single configuration have the most relevant things displayed for them? I've heard it described before that cloud is like having a Rolex and a can of beans on the same shelf in a shop. How do you determine what the right thing is for you? How do we make that easier? So with that in mind, we're going to be talking through Loome. Not sure what's happened with the title at the top there, but we're going to be talking through Loome with you, which effectively you can think of this like a management layer that sits over the top of the Azure environment, abstracting away some of the complexity that can come along with cloud, providing you with sort of access control to different components of Azure, but in a self-service manner. So as a research team, you can come in, use the tools and services you need without having to depend or rely on an IT service sort of ticket or query. But the IT team is in full control over what it is that people can go in and access on a case-by-case basis as well. So things like cost tracking, budgeting, all of these different elements are all built into this platform. And ultimately the goal is to reduce the management load on IT, streamline the process of actually determining what service it is that you need, that you're looking for, and then provide you with that cost tracking and budgeting and alerting throughout the process. And you can see that we've got a few universities, there are many more, but these are some of the key ones that have already adopted Loome and are using it widely across their institutions as it stands at the moment. So the way to kind of think about it is, as an individual, you access Loome. Loome provides you sort of a veneer on top of Azure to then get to any of those services which might be useful for you.
So we're going to show you a few videos of the different functionalities that Loome offers. And this first video, one of the reasons I liked it and I've included it even though you can quite see it's a test environment, is because this was me setting up a project a few weeks ago. I'd been given access to Loome. Obviously, I'd been sort of talked through how it works and I'd seen a demo, but I'd never really used it before. I've never accessed the cloud, or not intentionally anyway. And so this is me setting up a project for the first time after just about sort of 10-15 minutes exploring the environment, maybe half an hour of training. And this is me being able to sort of navigate the interface, and it's intuitive. It is that sort of streamlined approach. And of course, when you've got people that they don't need this level of simplicity, then that's fine. But when you've got other researchers that are curious, this is a much kind of calmer, easier way to kind of explore it. You can see here also we're setting budgets, and one of the things that I like the idea of is that you could set your budget as small as you need it, so you can explore whether or not this is the right direction of travel for your research. Is this the right methodology? You can set up your own contributors, and within that budget, you can set up your different alerts. So if you want an alert every 10% of your budget spend, you can have that, and you can choose who those alerts go to. So it's a really safe way of kind of trying to figure out, how do I use the AI analysis for this massive historical literature data set? Or, is this something that we can do? How do we work out what the prompts need to be? And I use AI just because I think that's sort of the gateway into sort of cloud for sort of researchers that aren't sort of software engineers. When you go through, you can also set your different collaborators. So you've got owners who they can edit the whole project, so that's setting up the budget. You've got contributors that can add and remove resources. Then you've got readers who could just use those resources. So you've got control over who accesses the resources that you've set that budget around. And if you think back to that first landing screen with those projects, you only see the projects you've got an involvement with. See, an IT admin will be able to see everything, but as that kind of user, that front door, you just go in and see what's relevant to you.
Cool. Perfect. So I think the only other thing that I'd add on top of that there as well is that from a collaboration perspective, we know that collaboration doesn't just happen within your institution. Research is inherently collaborative by nature, and therefore you're going to be looking for collaboration across different institutions, different countries. The way that Loome is set up is it means it can integrate with your institution's identity management service. So you don't need a new set of credentials to be able to access it. It's not yet another password to either remember or add on a password manager. It links up with your existing single sign-on for your institution as it is at the moment. What that means is that, say, if the University of Warwick had a Loome set up and they wanted to add a researcher from Sheffield, then you can do that. They get added as a guest to the university's identity. And that means that any sort of requirements you may have around sort of multi-factor authentication that the university has, all of that follows through to everything that sits on Loome as well. So from a security and access perspective, this is kind of an extension of the university to begin with. So beyond project setup and project management, we then also have adding storage.
So again, like it's a really simple process. So while you set up your project, you set sort of the storage that you would like. But then once you're in the project and it's running, you can change that storage as well. You have that sort of control. And you set it at whatever you need it to be, but then you pay for the amount of storage you actually use within that limit, so you can control it. You can see here on this screen that you can see the breakdown of what each project has spent. And when you click into those projects, you can see which bit of that project has spent that money. So is it the storage? Is it the compute? The adding the resources. So this is where you can add what we call solution collections. So if you've spoken to me on the stand, you might probably talk about templates. So it's pre-set up by admin or a software engineer that knows what they're doing. So I can go in and add in the right solution collection, the right set of storage, because that's what I can see. I can choose those options from a very simple short list. In terms of interacting with data repository, I don't fully understand this because I'm not a software engineer, but it works. It all connects together really simply. And as soon as that repository is up added to that project, you can start interacting with it.
So from an end user's perspective, as Nicola said, you may not necessarily understand or know everything that's happening on behind the scenes, and that's okay, as long as there's somebody who does. And that's the point of being able to then have your IT team involved, or an RSE. I think the RSEs are in an interesting spot where actually you could be considered a sort of complete end user, where you've got that simplistic view presented to you. But equally, at the same time, you could equally be that person that's designing those templates to then provide them to maybe your research groups that you're seconded to, where maybe you've got some people who aren't so tech literate, and you've designed a template to say, look, all you have to do, click here to deploy it, it's done. And you're the person that knows what's happening behind the scenes. You're the person that's orchestrated it. So these data repositories, as you build them under the hood, building resources within Azure, and then surfacing them to you in a digestible manner. And you can see here that from within the same interface, you then get the instruction set up to be able to then mount that data storage either locally to your machine, whether it's Windows, Linux, or Mac. And then equally, you can mount that to a virtual machine as well within the cloud environment, which we'll show through the next video.
So this is showing how you add a workstation to a project. And again, I think this is where you can really see the simplicity. So there's huge numbers of options available on Azure, whereas here there's just a short list. And you can provide users like me, as typically a use case as a researcher that doesn't really have any sort of software experience, is I know that I just need a small workstation or I might need a large one. But I've got some guidance that matches what I need by talking to sort of IT or software engineers to figure out what my actual use case requires. And then I'm only paying for what I need. I'm not paying for something that I don't need because I've misunderstood the requirements.
Some of you might sit there and think, well, what does small, medium, and large workstation actually mean? Is that helpful to me as an individual? And the answer is probably not. But for an end user who's kind of comes to somebody and says, I don't know what I need, this is what I'm trying to achieve, maybe as an RSE or maybe as an IT team, you can provide advice and guidance and say, look, you need a small machine. There you go. You know what you're looking for. You're not sort of bamboozled with number of cores, amount of memory, storage, that sort of stuff. It's there for you. You know what it is. And you can go ahead and get started without necessarily having to have that understanding. Equally, this template collection, as Nicola said, could be incredibly long. There's no reason why you can have this as 800 items long with every single option that exists in Azure. But in reality, that's probably not the best thing to do. So narrowing it down for an individual is key. And this is based on the individual user who logs in as well. So maybe there's a group of users who are more experienced. You can provide them with a different experience as what it is that they're going to see compared to maybe a more novice user. So you have that complete control and flexibility over the platform.
I think this is still, it's the video just reset itself. The challenge of videos in PowerPoint.
So then workstation images on top of that as well. So in addition to having a template which then determines what the hardware looks like, you then have your image on top of that as well. So this can be templatized to sort of come together, or you can split those options out. So your image is effectively your hard drive. So if you want to provide somebody with maybe a Ubuntu setup that has a particular software configuration already done for an individual researcher who has some specific requirements, to mean that they don't have to do that, and you can provide that as an image that maps on top of that template. So all they have to do is say, I'm told I need a small workstation. Here's the image that's been made for me. Maybe that's the only option that you're providing them. You pull the two together, and the workstation is ready to go. Carry on through.
So you've got your sort of admin control as well. It's there is some there's governance around it to make sure that people have the right levels of access at the right time. It's obviously linking to the data repository that you've already put in. This way you can automatically shut it down so it doesn't just keep running without you sort of realizing, and you can you sort of don't overspend when you don't intend to.
So if you know that actually you're only going to be working on this particular machine and you don't forget to turn it off, because obviously if you leave it running, then you can be charged for it. So if you say, actually, I want it to turn off at this time every single day, so I don't have to worry about it, then you can absolutely do that, and it will automatically shut down as well. So that capability sits in there too.
So again, like connecting to these things, I would have no idea. Well, I still don't have any idea how I really connect to a virtual machine, but here it's all there for me. I can click through and I can connect to it, and I can use those machines as I need to undertake that sort of research. Adding these data repositories to your machines as well, it all connects a bit like Lego blocks together. So you sort of choose this kind of selection, and you can see here there's the solution collections are on there. You've got AI for bioinformatics on there. So that's a solution collection that someone has templatized. So you just draw that in. So it's very repeatable because you just keep drawing these templates in each time it's relevant to a project. So here it's connecting to a HPC cluster. Just to sound like a broken record, I wouldn't know how to do this without this sort of interface. Again, it's all set up for me. I mean, arguably, I wouldn't necessarily be connecting to a HPC cluster without knowing this sort of technology. But this just shows kind of how quick and easy it is to get from a very graphical sort of interface into kind of the cluster that you need to run your analysis.
So important to call out that Loome doesn't just provide you access to a virtual machine. You can build any resource that exists in the Azure environment through Loome. So whether that's an HPC cluster, whether that's a machine learning notebook, whether that's a large language model deployment, whatever it may be, everything can be deployed through Loome. So in this example here, you can see that we logged into an HPC cluster, and depending on how you set up that machine, whether it's Linux or Windows based, you're, as a user, given the instructions to go ahead and then make that connection. I always found it interesting how when running training for PhD students that never really touched any sort of advanced quote-unquote computing before, how foreign SSH can be. Having that sort of easy walkthrough is great. But equally, if you wanted to set something up with a remote desktop for a GUI interactive environment instead that opens in a new browser tab, you can default your connection options to that as well. So depending on what the end user's requirements are, how comfortable or not they feel with command line, you can customize that experience for them as well. This is the old set of slides.
Oh,
I can walk through this bit.
yeah.
So we did have a video here that shows creation of a solution collection. So the idea being is that as an end user, you maybe don't necessarily need to see the high levels of complexity that are there. So this means that as an RSE or as somebody from IT, sort of central services team, you can create these solution collections so that end users only see what they need to. So if a research group comes to you and say, I'm really interested in deploying a machine learning pipeline, I don't know anything about machine learning or how I should configure any of the hardware. I know this is something that I want to experiment with. Can you help me build that sort of setup? And that's something that as a researcher, do they really need to spend their time figuring that out, learning that? There's kind of an argument of maybe depending on the research that they do, they absolutely need to know everything that's going on behind the scenes. But in some cases, actually having support from a technical expert or an RSE is really, really valuable there. So actually, could you build that solution out? So you templatize the hardware deployment in a infrastructure as code sort of way. So whether that's using Terraform and then sort of translating it into Azure resource management code, you effectively can create these solutions, which then allows a user to have a tile in their Loom environment, which maybe just says machine learning pipeline, deploy here. They click the deploy button, all of your infrastructure as code runs, deploys, and then becomes available for them to then go and use. So rather than you having to maybe sort of sit down and sort of babysit people through things, then maybe you can actually sort of provide that hardware configuration ready for them to go straight away, and to kind of give them sort of free rein of that environment, knowing that you've got that infrastructure as code there ready to go. This also means that if there are people coming with the same request over and over, you can obviously deploy that for multiple people and kind of enable that solution collection for multiple groups of users as well. So it's a really flexible tool that makes it really easy to be able to cover all bases of different people's needs. And again, that can be anything from virtual machines to any other resource that exists across the cloud. So I also would have done a video, so the idea being that how do you actually access Loom? So Loom by default is accessed through a web browser, so it's just a web interface, so nice and easy and accessible for everybody. However, it also integrates with Microsoft Teams as well, so that is an option, not something which you're forced to do. But if you wanted to, then you can access it through Teams. The added benefit here, in my mind as well, is that you can then link a Teams channel to a particular research project. So if you wanted to have your collaborative conversations, sharing files, all of that sort of stuff in one place with access to Loom as a window as well, all within one place, that's something that you have capability to deploy as well. So web browser or through Microsoft Teams as an option. So showing some of that sort of base fundamental capability of Loom, there's far more to it than that. We wanted to kind of show some of the key functionality there. Very happy to go through some bits and pieces in more detail if you want to come and stop by our stand. But we kind of see this then integrating within universities, sort of IT service catalogs. So all of these different services we've talked through, including things like trusted research environments, genomics analysis, machine learning, data storage, virtual machines, quantum services, deployment of generative AI tools, Internet of Things, all of these sorts of services that exist. Being able to do that in a self-service, autonomous fashion, all of the sorts of benefits are outlined there, are the sorts of things we try to target. So the sort of flow that we've developed is something like this, and this is what we're working through with a number of universities at the moment. So the idea being is that a researcher can come with an idea, a technology requirement, discussing what the developmental next requirements may be. And that consultation could happen with central IT, it could be with an RSC, some sort of research IT concierge that exists. There's also support from Microsoft as an account team there as well, and from Methods. But the idea is that you then make a decision on can those requirements be fulfilled with any existing on-premise resources or any national facilities that exist that you already have access to. If you can, that's great. But if not, is there something else that we can provide you instead, which is going to be able to meet those needs? So then we start looking at whether Azure is an appropriate solution for that or not. So at that point, we want to make sure that we're determining whether the cost of any potential solution in the cloud could match up with what your available budget is, and whether that sort of feels realistic or reasonable to you. So we go through that sort of exercise to give you that understanding of what that looks like before you kind of forced to commit to anything. And then we figure out whether that's something which you have the funding available to go and do. So there are ways in which we can hopefully help and support you as well. So if the research teams that you're working with don't necessarily have the funding available to go down that route, we typically support with things like necessary support for funding calls, where we outline a variety of different in-kind benefits around support for potential Azure credits, technical support, and training as well, that all exist within that sort of package. Once we get to that point, funding being available, which hopefully we've been able to help with, we then go through that route of then onboarding onto the Loom platform and determining what that template needs to look like to meet that researcher's needs, or giving the RSC access to go and create that template for them to then go and do that deployment. So this is the sort of concierge type flow which we're working towards, as I said, with a few institutions. The idea here being that the research team always has the choice, the option as to what services they want to use. And if they do end up wanting to use cloud, what's the way that makes that easiest and gives you maximum visibility over what is available. So that is everything that we wanted to talk through and share with you. So we're absolutely looking for feedback around how people feel about accessing cloud and those sorts of services for research. We'd love to have that conversation with you over our stand. We've got some notes and stickers and things out in order to try and engage some responses to these sorts of questions. We'd love to hear from you around what it is that you think we could be doing in order to improve that experience or make it more appealing. Or what the challenges are that you perceive when it comes to engaging with Azure from a research perspective. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, get the final questions up. I'll put a few of them, I think. Brilliant. So can Loom work in a multi-cloud setup where resources come from other commercial cloud providers such as AWS?
It's a great question. So Loom is currently available to work with Azure. However, it can integrate with on-premise resources. So for example, if you've got an on-premise HPC setup, then you can integrate Loom with that as well. So if you're submitting jobs through one HPC queue and you want that to go to on-premise first by default and then burst into the cloud afterwards, or any other on-prem resources you have, then that's sort of where that comes into play. There are some other solutions around as well that have a bit more of a multi-cloud sort of focus. I'm happy for you to come and talk to me about that if that's something you want to follow up on.
Okay, and the next most popular question I get, can Loom report on carbon emissions, both the operational and embodied from the resources?
So not natively within Loom, but within the Microsoft Azure portal, there is a carbon footprint tracker within there. So any resources that you create through Loom are ultimately under the hood created within Azure. So all of that information around carbon emissions and carbon footprint reporting is available within the Azure dashboard.
Okay. Where are we? So yeah, what data repositories can Loom integrate with? Is this just raw storage, or can you bring in external resources and external data repository?
Yeah, so kind of like the question that I answered earlier on around HPC, so you can connect to on-premise things as well. So if you've got data that's stored on-premise and you want to connect that in and be able to make that link into the Azure resources, then you can absolutely do that. Obviously, there's then a question around whether that data that you've got stored on-premise, whether the sort of time, the latency of then sending that up to the cloud and then pulling it back down again afterwards, whether that's a bottleneck for you, or whether you should just move all the data to the cloud to begin with. It depends on what your requirements are, but you can absolutely make that connection.
Fine. I think maybe time for one more. Can Loom integrate with university invoicing financing? What does paying for access actually look like in practice?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So this is like a major challenge when it comes to any universities integrating with any cloud vendor. So what that means is that anything that you spend through Loom, typically the way that we are setting this up with universities is that when you create a project, you're asked a question such as, what's your cost center? So you have to provide that information. Then maybe there's a step where that cost center is verified by finance or IT in conjunction with one another. Once that's been validated, that means that then any of the billing invoicing that comes from Microsoft through Loom is then automatically tracked for your project back over to that cost center. So within one of those research projects, any resource you create is automatically tagged under your project umbrella, meaning that all of that happens automatically. So that becomes something which is easier for IT and finance to manage internally within the university.
Actually, we've got time for one more, so let's do that. The last one here is there a way you can use Loom to discover data sets, or do you need to know in advance where they are? So,
Yeah, good question. So there are, as far as I'm aware, there aren't any data sets that sort of that come like prepackaged with Loom, as it were. The idea being, well, you kind of need to know about what data set it is that you want to use, and then you connect that in with Loom or move that into the cloud storage to be an item there. Loom can be set up as a trusted research environment as well. So if you have data that you want to store in a trusted research environment and integrate it with Azure in a similar way to we heard about earlier on, and you want that sort of UI experience, then you can do that in a similar way too. But again, you would need to know what that data set is and bring it yourself.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.